Got a nice critical mass here.
I like the way you compose sentences.
Okay, so
Got a
participate.
nice critical mass here. Look at that.
I like the way you compose sentences. Oh no.
Feedback, Robert, where'd that come from?
Oh, it's because of, I'm sorry, the live stream. I have to mute it. Okay, let me just let everybody in. There they come.
Oh, nice. We get to see.
Some actual faces. So Robert, is everyone in now?
Yes, yep, everybody's in now.
Okay, let's begin. My name is Evan Douglas. For those who haven't met me, I know this is being presented live stream. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And before I introduce our distinguished speaker this evening, I'd like to say a few words about our annual Global Perspectives Lecture tonight, sponsored by my Dean's Leadership Council. On June 10th, 2020, in response to the brutal and senseless killing of George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protests that emerged throughout the US and abroad, I issued a public statement as the Dean of the School of Architecture to our entire school community, voicing my grave concern about the obvious repugnant systemic racism and injustice that the Black community continues to endure as an oppressed people in the US today. I felt it was imperative as an academic leader and a role model to our students to speak out forcefully in support of the spontaneous sense of outrage and anger expressed around the world concerning the immoral character of our nation and the urgency for radical change. In support of my call for action, my Dean's Leadership Council, comprised of some of the school's most respected alumni, issued the following public statement, and I quote, "As witnesses to the intolerable acts of injustice and other atrocities against individuals of color throughout our lives and our nation's history, the members of the Dean's Leadership Council of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute School of Architecture wholeheartedly endorse Dean Evan Douglas's June 10th, 2020 message to the RPI community. We extol this message throughout our nation and the world because it represents both the depth of anguish we each feel and our collective vision for an equitable future. The Council is committed to the continued development of a civilized, virtuous society. As a result of their determined and passionate desire to make a real difference regarding the creation of a more inclusive community throughout the school, and in recognition that all of our students will one day go out into the world as future leaders with the potential to contribute to a more fair and equitable society, my Leadership Council now serves as the primary sponsor of this important annual Global Perspectives Lecture. On behalf of the entire school, I want to thank them for their generous support and heartfelt advocacy for meaningful social change. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Vivien Sansour, an internationally renowned artist, storyteller, researcher, and environmentalist, deeply committed to seed conservation and agrobiodiversity as a global moral imperative today for our world community. Spiritually invested in the protection of biodiversity as a deeply cultural and political activity, Sansour uses images, sketches, films, soil, seeds, plants, and food in her contemporary creative practice as a means to bring to life old cultural tales surrounding our beautiful but fragile agricultural heritage. Born and raised in Palestine and educated as an anthropologist, she has created a life of advocacy in support of farmers and indigenous communities around the world that rely on the cultivation, vigor, and good fortune of their seeds, crops, and agricultural farming as their sole livelihood. Particularly interested in the shared inheritance within seed conservation that preserves our ancient relation to the earth and Mother Nature as an infinite source of nutrients, knowledge concerning environmental adaptation, and the glorious string of diverse legacies handed down from one generation to the next surrounding food and farming, Sansour has a deep understanding and appreciation for the complex and intricate relationships that are contained within the genealogy of seeds. As part of her lifelong effort to educate and inspire others, she founded the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library located in the village of Batir and the El Bear Arts and Seed Studio in Bethlehem, both in Palestine, as well as the Traveling Kitchen Project. Considering the unsettling existential challenges we face collectively as a world community today regarding environmental degradation, the rise of political and ethnic strife we witness on a daily basis around the world, and the slow eradication of many of our shared cultural traditions, it's wonderfully refreshing to celebrate a voice of reason and insight in support of our shared collective memory, freedom, self-determination, community building, and the overall restoration of our planet. Please welcome Vivien Sansour to RPI this evening.
Wow, Evan, thank you. That's such a beautifully written and generous introduction. I don't know, I mean, if I can meet this grandiose introduction, but thank you so much for hosting me and also for being part of this global community that is putting effort, whether we're institutions or whether we are in community groups or grassroots, whether we're in the field, where we're trying to design something else, because something else is possible, hopefully anyway. But whether we achieve it in our lifetime or not, at least we can move forward in life knowing that we have tried.
Absolutely.
And so I really appreciate you taking part in all of this, and also inviting me, because we are now in this time where we have to recognize each other as partners, beyond old paradigms of nationalism and other limited ideas, so that we can actually create something else. I want to thank everybody who was patiently waiting. I'm so sorry I was late. I'm new to Boston and I got a little bit lost where I was. Anyway, but I see we have a lot of people and their names, which is great. So it's just you and me on video, right?
Yes, yes.
Cool. So I would like to give just a quick overview of my journey, and then perhaps it'll be nice if people, we can open it to questions. So I'm going to share screen, and please forgive me, I'm totally technically challenged, but we're going to try to optimize this and do it. Now it's asking me for a password. It didn't earlier. Okay.
Yeah, it'll work. There you go.
Yeah, you can see me, right?
Yes, I can see it. Absolutely.
Great. So yeah, I like to always start by sharing a story of Ahmed, who has been the woman who I met only one time, but has inspired me to do this work actually for a long time. And the story of Ahmed is that She is from the Haitian refugee camp. As Evan mentioned, I was born and raised in Palestine. I'm from Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, we have 3 refugee camps. And one of them is called the Haitian refugee camp, which is the bigger camp. And as it is the situation now in Palestine, we live in several levels of layers of imprisonment. Basically, there are people who are actually in political prison in Israeli jails, and there are people who are in refugee camps who were forced out of their homes in 1948 and 1967 and became internally displaced people. And then within our cities, we are caged inside a concrete wall and with a system of segregation that makes it, for example, not possible for me to be on certain roads. And so Ahmed lives in the refugee camp, and the refugee camp often experiences a lot of raids, army raids at night. And so one of the things that also happen is that many homes get demolished. This is all part of a greater policy to basically eradicate people, indigenous people, the Palestinian people in this case, from their homeland. And Ahmed has two sons. One was put in political prison for life, 10 times for life, meaning like he will never go out of jail. And then her husband was shot and was became handicapped, disabled. And then their house was completely demolished. And so I was actually doing my master's in anthropology. This was probably 15 years ago now or more. And I was asked by a British lawyer who was documenting her case if I could go and offer interpretation of her story. So there I was sitting in her home, or not in her home, in the chicken coop, which became her home because her home was destroyed. And now she was living in the chicken coop with her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren, and her husband. And while we're sitting in the chicken coop, literally outside, trying to stay warm, it was February, Ahmed kept bringing these delicious spinach pies and just sharing them with us. And while she was sharing, obviously, her horrifying story about how her house was demolished, I couldn't resist but be like, what is this? How are we eating like the best food, which would be considered like, if I were in New York, like gourmet, like organic food, but like, how are we eating this right here? And she took me to the back of the chicken coop, and she showed me that on the ruins of her home, she had started a garden, a home garden, and that's where we were eating. That's how she was feeding her family. And so for me, it was a really, really important moment to understand like the human ability to not just survive, but also design new realities, even in the midst of completely dire situations, and how a human capacity for design is really at the core of survival as well. So this was one initial story that kind of started me on the journey of seeds. Obviously, I was also born and raised in what used to be a very rural village, which is now a very urban town. But now, sorry, hold on, there's a little bit of noise. Sorry about that. So I grew up with a grandmother who basically
Imagine your little.
Wait, I think it was.
Can you not hear me? Hello?
I can hear you, Vivien. Maybe Robert can turn off the mics of everyone.
I think, okay. That
Yeah.
explains where okay, I understand. So I grew up with a grandmother who basically did everything in the garden and produced for us also a lot of fruits and vegetables. And I followed her, even though my grandmother really didn't like girls. I did follow her, and I used to go and also clean up after her rabbits. And so I grew up with nature and I co-evolved with nature. And so my playground was these terraces where I would just discover things. But now when I returned back home, my home, which used to be a lush, biodiverse paradise, became basically what I call a cemetery, because it's all buildings of concrete that are built on top of each other inside this gigantic prison. And so all the biodiversity that we grew up with is dying. So my work, often people describe it is about conservation, and it is about conservation in a lot of ways. But actually, it's also a lot about grief. We're in constant state of grief, of losing things that we once knew, losing things that actually once gave us sense of tenderness or comfort. And these are things that are not just mushy things that we want to talk about. They're very real also for our survival. Because yes, indeed, we can survive as a human species, and walk around, eat, and function. But actually, like, is that the way we want to survive as machines? But again, we're in a post-human world, so I don't know, we might be. But this is my interest, which is like, I was trying to, figure out how to deal with my grief, which was whether it was losing the spinach or losing the cauliflower or losing the grapes that my grandmother used to crush and make into a fruit lather, or whether it was just the community activity of sharing food with each other. I felt that all of it, a combination of basically political violence, neoliberalism, economic violence, and a fast-moving climate crises, that we have to do something. Like, I would like to expand a little bit these tender spaces, and I found this tenderness in seeds. And as you can see, these are the seeds actually of heirloom spinach, and you can tell in their cluster, sometimes you look at them, you're like looking into space, because these are several seeds. They're very spiky and they look like a planet of some sort. But actually, this is how the heirloom seed looks like, which is another world. Like, you enter it and it's like you entered another world. And then I started to notice the difference between the commercial seed, which is actually perfectly rounded and smooth, because the idea is we don't want to have to be, deal with touching the seed even, and being poked by it. But it is a big difference in terms of the taste and the flavor of the seeds. But this was one of my first seed harvests. Because I started to look for seeds and to also look for the stories of these seeds. And, I learned the story of Ahmed, but there were stories that everybody carried, with the story of a seed or a crop. And one of the seeds that became a big obsession for me was the seed of these watermelons that people, when I lived in the northern villages of Jenin, would talk about as these wonderful watermelons that people miss so much. But I spent 2 years working with farmers in the north, and in those 2 years there wasn't a day that I'm serious, like not a day that I talked to a farmer that they didn't mention this Jaddui watermelon. And so I was dying to understand, like, where is this watermelon? And many women actually, elderly women in their 80s and 70s and 80s would even remember, they would say, oh, I gave birth in the watermelon field. Or someone will say, you know, we hid in the watermelon field during the war. Or people would put the watermelon under the bed in the summer and keep it cool for October, like that you would eat watermelon in the fall. So there was a lot of stories around this watermelon, but when I asked about the watermelon, everybody would say, well, you're asking about the dinosaur, it doesn't exist anymore. And that's really how my journey started, with like being unable to let go of the fact that, oh my God, there's this whole story that I'm losing, and not me personally only, but like as a people we're losing, but also as a global community we're losing. Because the more I learned about these seeds, I learned that they are the product of design, with folks who actually cultivated them to co-evolve with the soil, to co-evolve with the different microclimates. So these watermelons that everybody was talking about actually grew with zero irrigation. They are part of a collection of seeds that we call Bali Seeds. And Baal refers to the Canaanite deity of fertility. And so there's a whole system of knowledge that actually goes around this, the cultivation of these seeds, which means that, you know, over literally thousands of years, people kept experimenting, applying science and observation to figure out how we can get a seed that can grow on thirst, because we don't get a lot of rain, or we only get rain in the winter. And so I started to look for these seeds, and then I started to learn that there are actually people still with their names, like this lovely man here, whose name is actually Jaddui. This is his surname. So, but he didn't know. He didn't know why his name was Jaddui. And so, and as you can see, he's actually, there are date trees in the back. And that's because he is now working in this agribusiness plantation, basically for dates, which is where I met him. And this, in this very place, was a very biodiverse and lush farms in the past. But I realized when I met him and he said his name was Jaddui, and I was telling him, oh, like the watermelon, that he didn't know what that is, that actually this was the true tragedy, that the more we lose these stories, the more we lose the system of knowledge, we're actually losing ourselves. And there's a lot of danger with losing ourselves. It's not just this romantic notion about like, oh, I want to know myself, and no, it's actually the way you walk in the world, the way you move in the world. And also, again, when I keep talking about design, because it's something that's really important, how to be intentional in the world today, and how important it is to be better designers. But we can't be better designers if we don't even know what the color palettes are. You know, who are we? So the story continued by me going from different places, asking people if they've heard of the Jaddui watermelon. And a lot of people, again, continued to say, oh, well, nobody has it anymore. Until I met Khadr Abu Ghattas, who is actually, funny enough, he lives in my hometown. So I was looking all over the country, but he was next door. And I just went in there the first time and I was like, oh, have you heard of this Jaddui watermelon? And he's like, what? Jaddui, I have some. You want those seeds? Here, have them. Nobody wants them. And it was a very powerful moment, because again, the thing that to say nobody wants them was huge for me, because it was like someone telling me we don't want who we are. And that's when I started to be a little bit more diligent in looking for more and more of these seeds. And I found that the places to find those seeds were literally in the old jars and old empty chocolate tin boxes that mostly old ladies kept different seed varieties and different plants. And with the extinction of seeds, we're also talking about extinction of like the linguistical diversity, because even as in Arabic, for example, in Palestine, we say for the word seed, it's the same word for the zaria, which means also plant, but it also means children. So people refer and introduce sometimes their children as zarriati, or oh, this is your zaria, these are your seeds. And that made me think a lot more about what does it mean, also the extinction of this diversity of seeds, with each seed having a story. It was kind of, again, like a very literal and metaphoric awakening to say, oh, this is the extinction of our cultural identity, our cultural heritage, and our cultural diversity. You know, we don't all have to eat the same zucchinis. You know, some of the zucchinis are a little lighter, some darker, some taste a little bit more buttery, some more watery, some need more water, some need less water. And how do we actually take these seeds as our teachers that can teach us how, you know, the more you have in your toolbox, the more able you are to be autonomous, the more able you are to imagine and apply this imagination to the world you want to create. This is just a picture with Haj Hamoudeh. Haj Hamoudeh is 106 years old. So this journey kind of took me to all kinds of places, and I was so honored to meet amazing people like Haj Hamoudeh. And Hamoudeh is a nickname for, but his name is Muhammad basically. And basically he's lived 106 years. So he has seen it all, from British colonialism to, you know, first the Ottomans, he was there, the British, he is there, now Israel, and the Zionist project, and then the Palestinian authorities here. So he has seen it all. And when I was asking him about, you know, why I was there, I was asking him about wheat, because I was very interested in wheat. And he said, you're not here looking for wheat, you're here looking for yourself. And that was also a very powerful moment, because I got to be humbled and also know that he's right. You know, he knows as a 106-year-old that so much has changed, and so much has changed to the point where we look at ourselves and there's a lot of familiarity, but we're not sure what we're looking at. And I think this is where we are in the world. We're in this bridge moment where we're not who we used to be, but we are not who we are becoming either. And that's why these conversations are so imperative right now, because as we are sitting on this bridge, we're going to have to make some serious, tough decisions on individual levels and also on global level. And I want to share with you, I again, about the genius of human design when it comes to food. This picture is of Imsami, and in this very picture, Imsami grows both broccoli, which is a newly developed crop, relatively modern crop, and particularly in Palestine, it's a new crop, and the heirloom cauliflower. And the heirloom cauliflower, which we call Zahra Baladiyeh, actually sits in the ground, the seed, for 9 months, exactly as long as a child stays, I mean, a baby sits in a mother's womb. So we wait with great anticipation every year for the season of the cauliflower. And it is quite an amazing tradition. This picture that you're seeing is an auction, actually. It's like a beauty pageant where people come and they bring their cauliflowers that, you know, again, it grows for 9 months with no water, no irrigation. It lives off of water from the winter, water retained in the soil. And so, and actually in my practice, I often combine a lot of obviously storytelling, but because I find these stories fascinating, like how can a tradition like this disappear, which it is, but also how can we take these old traditions of like, this is kind of cool, you know, like you take your cauliflower, now you have an auction, and also because the farmers have so much autonomy in this case, they own the seed, and they are their own basically boss, but also they also decide the price because it's their cauliflower. They get to decide how much it's worth. And this is very important in terms of having economic autonomy for farmers, because as long as in today's world, most farmers are basically subject to companies that come and decide basically this is how much we're going to pay. But what that does isn't just keep a farmer less independent economically. What it does, it takes away this imagination, which led to the development of this heirloom cauliflower, which led to the development of the wheat, which led to the development of the Jaddui watermelon. There's some scribbles coming on my screen. How did that happen? Did someone just do this, or it was here?
Yeah. I'm not sure how that was accomplished.
That is magic. We're talking about magic, and there it is.
Maybe that's the cauliflower drawing a note back to you.
Yeah, amazing. Actually, I want to draw your attention to the background here. I'm trying to get the, I don't think that my light is bad. Hold on. Because it's a painting by an artist named Aida Arafe. It's not complete yet.
Yeah, we see.
You
Yeah.
see, yeah. And it's basically based on this image. And it's an acrylic painting. And the idea of this is that we're gonna basically make a series of this beautiful flower, and its different stories. In this case, this is an auction in the Jordan Valley, which is a valley that is going through a lot of transformation because of climate change and policies that have actually rendered a lot of these communities basically thirsty. But I feel like I talked a lot, and maybe I should. How much time do we have?
No, we're fine. Go, Vivien, go right ahead. This is very important.
Okay, cool.
What you're sharing with us.
So this is another crop. It's called Haiti soda, which means, well, it just means, it's the name of it's gone again. What is this? And I fell in love with this wheat completely. I was in the field visiting this very particular farmer. His name is Khaldoun, in the southern hills of Bethlehem. And it's a semi-desert area. And this wheat grows on complete, like, no irrigation, zero irrigation. I mean, this is very important because we're talking about a global crisis that's needing more these kinds of varieties. You know, we have droughts in California, for example, and we need varieties. Like, I grow heirloom almonds in Palestine that require no irrigation. And we know that in California, one of the main problems why we have droughts is how much the water is used to irrigate massive almond fields. So imagine if we actually apply our ability to imagine a crop and our knowledge of science that, you know, doesn't require so much irrigation, and we can have eat almonds without destroying the planet. And so this is a wheat called Abu Samra, and Abu Samra literally means dark and handsome. And so I started to look for its story. And as I talked to particularly like women who needed the bread of Abu Samra, they'd often talk about it as this kind of lover that just disappeared. And so I collaborated with a musician named Zaid Hilal, and Zaid created a song for Abu Samra. It's a love song, but it was an important collaboration because Khaldun here, when we first were like, can you please grow a lot of it for us? He was like, oh my God, nobody wants to buy this. Nobody knows what this is. And so I'm gonna send my sheep to graze it. And I was like, you can't do that, oh my God. And so we had to convince him not to do that. And then in order to, reintroduce this ancient but kind of new now variety to our community and to younger generation, we obviously wanted to do something. And a song by a popular young artist was really, really powerful, because there are these kids now listening to this pop song and wondering, what is he talking about? And then now calling this farmer saying, I want to taste it. I want to taste my history. I want to taste this Abu Samra. And so it was like kind of the return of this dark and handsome lover. This is my great grandmother Jamile and my father. This is a picture in the 1930s. Anyway, it's a long story, but I'm often told that my great grandmother's Jamile's tomato, who I've never met her, were so delicious that people in our town still talk about it. I want to kind of skip through this a little bit. I'd love to have more of a Q&A situation soon, but I will just share about this, which is the Traveling Kitchen Project. It's a project that came out of the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library, which I established after basically finding a lot of these seed varieties and working with teachers to work with their students to basically document these stories and learn more about their agricultural and heritage. But one of the challenges we had was, again, that people didn't know about these varieties. And so I wanted a kitchen that can fold or come apart and fit in my car so that I can go to places where the kitchen itself becomes a catalyst, a seed itself, to have a conversation. So people would come around and ask, what is this? And we would cook these heirloom varieties with folks so that people can, again, eat their history, but also as a research platform where we can have an intergenerational conversation. And one of the things that I think is very challenging in our modern day society is that we're so segregated generationally. So like you have a playground for kids and a home for the elderly. And so you actually never benefit from the exchange of people who have lived decades before you, or, they know a thing or two, and so it was, for me, a way to bring back that intergenerational communion, if you will. And so, and it worked beautifully in that everywhere we went, we set it up, and people would just gather and have conversations about like, oh, what are these beans I haven't seen them in a while. Or someone would come and say, oh, well, we used to cook it with, I don't know, a fenugreek or something. And then you'll be curious, like, oh, I didn't know this was here. And then it just becomes a really vibrant way to engage community and also becoming the designers of their food system. So for example, in some villages where we went, people decided that they wanted to work with the farmer directly and create their own co-op and bring the food every week and do their own thing. So the work is more like, I describe my work more as a pollinator, where I just go and kind of plant the seed, you know, and then people take it on, you know. There's no need to do anything else after. And right now I'm working actually on an exhibition at Foto Industria Biennale in Bologna in Italy, and I'm actually designing a kitchen that has wings, because the kitchen sort of, it went from having wheels to then often flying to different places in the world, including, for example, in London, where I did this whole project where I basically cooked Jamaican food in honor of my friend who was a seed saver and passed away, who was Jamaican. And every time you do that, the kitchen transforms and it becomes a communal space to talk about the things that we're grieving, and to talk about the things we're dreaming, and to talk about the things we want to design for our future. The kitchen also, with its wings, flew to the south side of Chicago in 2019, where actually I participated in the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And as part of a public program, I cooked berries that I collected from a destroyed village in Palestine in the south side of Chicago at Sweetwater Foundation. And that was a very powerful experience, because I mean, I think you all are familiar with the south side of Chicago and the severe injustices that folks endure there. And so for us to share our story, and for me to have these dried berries from Palestine to cook with, we literally ate each other's histories. And when that happened, we became also carriers, like partners in carrying this grief, but also participating in figuring out together, how do we design something different? This is an image, for example, of a project called Home I did in Bethlehem. It was also revolving the kitchen, where in this is mluchiyah that we're cooking, and it was cooked based on, you know, I planted this mluchiyah in honor of Abed, who's a 12-year-old boy who was shot coming home from school by Israeli snipers. And when they found his body, you know, his mom told me that they found a bag of chips in his pocket, because he was going home and he was hungry. He was going home for lunch from school. And I kept thinking about that, and how we're all deprived, especially young children, of the feeling of home, of safety. And so actually this is in the area close to where he was shot, where we sat down to cook, and to cook a lunch together, and to reclaim our time, reclaim our sense of safety, even in the midst of everything. But in order to do that, we had to clear a lot of the terraces from a lot of shrapnel, a lot of, there were grenades that were thrown there, buckets. We were like 16 volunteers for 4 days, just clearing out the soil. So literally we have destroyed, our soil in our case have been completely destroyed by this oppression and this violence. And I mean, it was a powerful project for me, and I think for the people who participated, because we also sat down and cooked together. And when we sit down and cook together, it's not just cooking together. Here we're preparing the leaves. This is a typical Palestinian dish, but this crop, mluchiyah, which is a mallow, it originates in Africa, but was domesticated in Palestine, and it's a staple dish. But to de-leaf, you have to sit together. And when you sit together all day doing this activity, you're also telling each other stories. And stories, again, are really important because they help us make sense of the world. This is me foraging another kind of mallow, wild mallow in California. And I like to show this picture because I remember that, and this is a long story also, but basically foraging also, which now is a hipster thing and it's a cool thing, it requires access to land and to space. And so here I was, for example, in this open space in California, foraging for mallow without anyone bothering me, well, except the guys who were mowing the lawn thinking it's just weeds. For me, it was food, and I was so excited to find it there. But you see here in this picture to the left, this is how it is to forage for the same plant in Palestine now. How do you sever people from their food source, from their land, is by, you know, severing them from their lands. And so it's really important also as we're walking around, you know, in open spaces to question, like, does everybody have the very basic right to enjoy nature, to be part of nature? And why is it that it's not? Finally, I want to just share with you this, and I think I'll stop. I would like to do a Q&A. This is how, like, the seeds sort of became this collaborator with so many people around the world. The one on the right is a seed art packet that we developed at the Hudson Valley with the Hudson Valley Seed Library. And it was a very beautiful collaboration because I sent some seeds of yaktin. Well, they flew. I don't know how they got to the Hudson Valley. And then this gourd that kept, which we call the mother, kept growing like crazy in the Hudson Valley. And now, you know, it's available, you know, for people in New York. It adapted in New York, and we started growing it in New York at the same time I was growing it in Palestine during the pandemic. And, you know, just talking about the different stages of how it was growing and how it was doing, it kept us really connected, you know, between Ken, who is of the Hudson Valley Seed Library, Seed Company, and myself in Palestine. And it was this kind of baby we had together. But it was, again, also interesting to see how it adapted in New York and how it did in New York, and how this co-creation that happened between folks in New York who were growing it and what they did for it, what they built for it to climb on, was different than what we did. And it was an interesting exchange of how, like, this new crop basically was welcomed and introduced, and how we got to learn about each other through it. So yeah, just to wrap it up, the work that I do is very much based on kind of a desire to reclaim our imagination and to say that we are dynamic beings, and we must be in relationship with everything around us, in a humble relationship where we can use art. And for me, farming is a form of art as well, where we can use music, whatever we need to use to imagine something different, because I'd rather really die than continue to live in a world that is so harsh and so brutal. And really, the seeds, nature, relationships that are created through all of that, for me, allow us to create these tender spaces with hopes that, you know, if we all kind of create our own tender space, we can then expand it into other realms and with other people. So yeah, and thank you for listening.
Oh, Vivien, thank you. Thank you. And As I say to all my guest speakers, and certainly in your case, if we were together and in real time, in real space, we would be in a very large room in our theater space on campus, and the students would be in front of you as well as the faculty. They'd be applauding you right now and thanking you for sharing with us your unique insight. And you know, it's interesting that it seems to me the best of art and architecture is a form of storytelling. It's about maybe helping us, like a mirror, see something in the world around us that we may not see due to the abundance of distraction and noise. And maybe, again, in the best of cases, the gifts that come back not only resonate with us now, but resonate with us for many years to come. So clearly you're at this, it's a really, really unique project because it's at the intersection between people and the legacies of people attributed or transported through seeds and food and rituals. And it speaks to simultaneously to social and environmental justice. It speaks to the eradication or loss of cultural rituals, which are happening on a continuous basis due to globalization, and of course the vulnerability and dangers that threaten our environment. So there's such a fantastic constellation of issues that are emerging from your work. And although you're very modest and generous in the way you present the project, the fact is, like that kitchen that has wings, your entire project has the capacity from a kind of grassroots perspective to proliferate through a variety of means and actually change the world. It could, in theory, right? I mean, I'm reminded of what is it, agroecology and the kind of almost ideological debate between the multinational corporations that descend down around the world and impose on the world these regulatory structures that force local communities into having to deal with pesticides and fertilizers and hybridized seeds, and a financial dependence on these corporations, which is rather, excuse the term, deadly. It's not sustainable. Versus the local communities saying, we may not have a lot of economic and political power, but we have an enormous amount of knowledge that has been obtained, accumulated over centuries, that allow us to understand how to become stewards of the planet. And might you listen to us? Might you consider our point of view, insofar on some level is that we all have something invested in keeping the planet safe. So I brought that up because as a kind of grassroots proposition, although it may meet only a certain number of people at any one time, your creative practice, as a model and as a strategy of engagement, it has an infinite scale of influence. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. And in a lot of ways, I think you're right, not because this is what I'm doing, but because I think this is the only way, which is to create, like I said, our own little spaces, because we need to expand them. You know, we may not have the economic power, as you said, for example, but what we do have is the knowledge, but we also have survival skills. We have stories, we have, I mean, I think we have a very important question to ask in every situation, which is, where is my power? Like, we are often put in these helpless situations, right? And the way that people have kind of accepted the status quo of the dominant world is by accepting that, you know, yeah, this is the way and there is no other way. But I actually, just the mere fact, and the more and more I'm like actually meeting people in my life and learning, I am bewildered by how much the fact, like, I was talking to someone recently and he's trying to liberate himself from you know, the dominant world, basically. And he said, well, nobody told me that something else was possible. And I think that this is really like not just a casual thing. Like, it's true that we're told, like, you have to go to college, you have to do it this way, you have to eat with a fork and knife, you have to, the possibility that you can, I don't know, eat with your hands is not part of the narrative of the dominant world, because the narrative of the dominant world is that there's only one way. And instead, like, how do we kind of braid different threads from all different ways in order to make like something beautiful? And I think for me, the idea that also in the dominant world we dismiss so much the heart, as if like we just need rational thinking and that's it. I think it was such a big mistake, and it takes away from, we are animals, you know, we have instincts and they're intelligent. And I think it's impossible to continue to live in a world where the heart, which I believe is much wiser and stronger than the brain, is completely dismissed. And the heart is so powerful. I know when I speak like that, especially, I mean, I'm at Harvard, so academic world, like, but when you speak about the heart as also a major resource, in fact, as the guide rather than the thing you must dismiss, I believe, like, for me, it was my heart that created all of this. Because I couldn't, it was, I was so in love, right? And I was fighting for this love, basically. And it's considered cheesy to say things like that. So how do we actually make space for that, so that whatever we create, there's an allowing of our realness, which is very much based on the heart.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because certainly your homeland, you're dealing with a far more, oh my God, kind of spiritually and ethically charged situation that threatens the very existence of a community. And while this may not be comparable, you know, I would certainly call attention to the fact that as an American citizen, our democracy is at risk here because of partisan politics, because of misinformation, because of the big lie. But you could even argue maybe kind of multinational corporations have assumed a disproportionate amount of control over the general public. But one has to step back and say, well, okay, so how do we overcome these extraordinary threats and dangers and the kind of immorality that we're seeing in many places around the world? And what's so kind of beautiful about your particular project and one of a number of the reasons why I reached out and invited you is because I think you kind of see the seed conservation and its relation to food and farming and agriculture all as a kind of universal language. It's like a beautiful song that is able to cut through all the noise, all the hate, all the kind of institutional kind of corruption and discrimination and oppression and fear and all that stuff, and say, listen, we're actually one family, and those differences are profound and poignant. And if you were talking about eating one's history, food doesn't come with that kind of bias. In fact, if anything, and again, maybe I'm speaking for myself because not everyone is enlightened about the beauty of different cuisines around the world, but it seems to me it's one of the most extraordinary journeys to learn the world through food and through the rituals of cooking and eating and congregating around food and the smells and the aromas. I mean, it's just, it's not simple, it's not prosaic. It may be common, but it actually binds us all together. And I think you're holding on to a language that's timeless and one that is able to move rather freely with very little resistance. And I'm being overly poetic here, but I do think that's maybe one of the powers of your critique and form of resistance that's built into the project.
Well, but also, actually, in when I first started doing this work, I was really focused on the resistance bit, like how do we resist all that's happening around us, right? And there is obviously a place for that. And then I started to think about creation.
Right.
How does creation actually sort of shift the focus, to what do I want, which is actually not such a simple question. It's a very hard question, especially when it's not a question just for you individually. That's why knowing who we are is so important as people, as individual, and then as community. Is really important, because then you can say like, oh, okay, what do I actually want to create? Like I'm in shit here, for example. I'm really sitting in, can you say that in academia? But like I'm sitting here in the mud and I'm stuck. So what can my hands reach that I can actually create? And the more I can weave something outside of the mud, maybe I'll create something that'll pull me out, that I'll even forget that I'm in the mud. Right. Recently I was on a farm in Michigan and I met this incredible person whose name is Bob. And he created something called Earthworks Music in Michigan. And he is a biologist conservationist, and he actually used to work in academia and then decided to buy this farm out in Michigan and move to it. And as soon as he moved there, he got very sick and became paralyzed. Oh, so he had just quit his dominant world job and he moved to the countryside and then became paralyzed. And of course, you would think that he would just give up and go back to the office or something. But instead, he decided that he needed to learn about the community around him. And basically, he started bringing people to do stuff with him. And so this farm is this incredible place. Like you walk in, it's another world within the world. Yeah. And it's because this guy didn't just create it by himself. I mean, he is still paralyzed, but he created a very dynamic and a world that actually moves a lot. It's really amazing to watch how the power of deciding to, instead of resisting his paralysis,
right,
creating something else. And I think it's our only choice, honestly, because I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm happy to explore other choices, but this was, and Seeds for me were definitely just watching how they also shift and change based on environment, and also seeing that we are seeds, like you're a seed, you're sitting there in your own environment, and this is how you kind of develop also, right? You react to what's around you. And yeah, seeds are a universal language because we are seeds, and because we all eat. And so I like to think that, yeah, the seeds are a wonderful platform to also reclaim presence for all the people and the things and the history and the future that, you know, is being denied.
Yeah, I do want to underscore something you said, which was you wanted to clarify, because I had used the word resistance, and in other words, you were saying, look, I'm about building bridges, and in order to overcome this kind of seemingly impossible situation that threatens my existence, I'm going to construct ladders and birds and planes and strategies of flight as a way to kind of dissolve that kind of kind of horrible situation, and I think you've done that.
Well, there is, I guess, you know, in some other words, is a kind of, it is a resistance to the reality also. Like, I am not interested in reality. I find reality, like, people will say, oh, you have to be realistic. I'm like, no, I don't. I really don't want to be realistic. That's not the world I want to live in. Or people tell me, oh, you have to look at the glass half full. I'm like, I shattered the whole glass. I'm not interested in the glass. And I wish that we'd all just take this stupid glass that everybody wants us to compromise with and say, oh, just take the glass half full and just freaking shatter it, because
Right.
I think it's a very mediocre way to look at the world, to say, I'm just gonna, I'll just accept. I guess I have a hard time just accepting reality. I'm not interested in that.
You know, although the term wasn't used this evening in your presentation, I have read it a number of times in things that you've written and interviews, and about your deep appreciation and interest in magic.
Yes, I do.
And I suppose in you know, to extend something you just said, you're not interested in reality. I mean, one constructs their reality. Right, and you can do it through different forms of fiction and fables and storytelling and myths, and they're just as real as anything else. In fact, they may be more real. So I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how, when did magic appear on your horizon as a young girl, and how do you use it as a kind of productive proponent of change?
Thank you so much for this question. It's beautiful how you framed it. Yeah, I love magic so much, and I wonder sometimes if it's because I find solace, or it's because it really does exist in my world. But I've come to, and my sisters used to tell me, come back to earth, you know, and I think there was a moment where I actually made an internal decision that I don't actually, I'd rather live in, even if I'm crazy and this is all like a figment of my imagination, I'd rather be there. So yeah, for me, I think magic started very early on as a child, where, like I mentioned, I grew up in these hills. Like, there was no one telling us what to play and how to play. And I think kids these days are deprived of that. they're even told what the game is.
Sure.
We had to come up with our game, you know. We sometimes it was like, oh, let's try to make something from the soil and build something. Of course, it never worked. It was just, you know, it's not. Or yeah, we saw, you know, people making clay pots. Or let's try it with like the dirt. That's, I mean, it didn't work. But then it's the butterfly. Like, everything was like, I discovered it by myself, by, you know, falling and breaking my leg or whatever, just like really discovering it. And so then, as everybody, like all of us in the world, most people, I was told that no, you know, this is, you know, I really need to kind of wash up and sit up and wear a suit and tie and go to college, because I will not be valuable in the world if I didn't, and if I didn't live in the city, and if I didn't speak English, and if I didn't, you know. And so I actually started to hate nature and magic, not hate, but like I left it, because I wanted to be in the city. I wanted to be, you know, quote unquote civilized. I believed the lie, like you very well mentioned. And then I realized at some point that that life was so, for me, void of that magic. And so it was this moment when I returned to the magic of soil and plant and flower and, you know, birds in particular. I was like, why would I ever leave that? You know, I don't. So I try to combine now also the magic of science, because I love science too. I think science is magical, including social science and architecture and all. So like, how do we find the magic? How do we marry the magic that's already there with the magic of the human imagination? You know, there's so much magic when you put a seed in the ground that looks like nothing, and then, especially like a lettuce seed, they're so light, and poof, suddenly you have a lettuce that you're crunching on, and it's becoming part of your body, and it eats the sun rays, and it becomes like, this is crazy magic. So I think when you look at these things, for me, when you believe in magic, then you can believe also that something else is possible.
Beautifully said. I'm now going to read a comment question from one of our faculty members, Christiana. I really like this idea that the seeds are cultivated for long periods of time in situ, in place, that over time they are more and more attuned to the local soil, the climate, etc. How do you feel these practices of attunement are coordinated, negotiated, and more among humans? Or is it more the pursuit of an individual or family who, carrying a seed and its legacy forward, is it more about cultivating a garden independently? The reason I ask is to attune architecture to site like the seeds could provide some of the positive futures you were speaking about in terms of cultivating a reciprocity between architecture and its surrounding environment. Perhaps another question, when or how do these moments of change from one thing to another occur in the work you were engaged with?
Well, it's a lot of questions, but I'll try to answer in the way I think I understood. Thank you for these questions, because actually I've been trying to engage some of the folks that do a lot of architecture rehabilitation of old buildings in Palestine, in a conversation about like, what is, how like, okay, you come to renovate a place, or you come to build a place, how do you consider the terrain? Like, how do you consider, you know, the history of the place and the community of a place? Because the structure is, we hope, is a living structure too, like that it would be something that reflects a dynamic life rather than just a monument, right? I don't know if I'm answering the question properly, but I think the question is, if I understand the question, is how did you understand the question? How do you?
Well, I think the primary term to me is attune. You know, it's a form of listening
Mm.
and enabling all of these different media to somehow participate in a kind of co-collaboration. And to the extent that change is to emerge, how might the seed, how might the recipe, how might the ritual undergo a modification to accommodate those changes?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that it's the listening is really important, and the humility. I think humility is often forgotten, especially when we have, for example, modern tools to do stuff. We go into space and we think, oh, we have solutions for this, and we miss out so much. Because we can't humble ourselves. We think we have answers. We really sometimes, I think, have to move into a place, almost ask permission to step into it. And not almost, I mean, literally ask permission. Like I sometimes go into the forest, like ask permission, because like our presence is often disruptive. And then really like be observant of everything around, not just the humans, but the plants, and how then conversations, like sometimes it's really as basic as really taking the time to have a lot of conversations with people, even people you don't know. Like a lot of my seed collection came as a result of lots of tea and coffee with people I know and people I don't know, and just allowing myself to actually feel this space and understand what is this space asking for. And the space is not just a physical space, it's a wholesome space with all living beings in it, like the people living there, the animals living there. So how we, and I think, like for example in Chicago, when they asked me to come and do an installation, I really didn't want to bring just the Palestinian heirloom seed library there.
Right.
And so we spent a month in the forest, actually just understanding where are we, before we started building. And we built with wood that was destroyed in a storm in Michigan. I don't know if this answers the question, but I think there's an answer within the question that was proposed, which is really the listening bit is so important. And there's so much that also can be heard outside of people's words. It's not what people, like when you ask a question, people answer you, but it's in the parts where they are not answering the question, that you actually get the answer. And to be sensitive enough in your heart to hear that bit, not because people will often answer what they think they need to answer.
No, that was a beautiful answer. And Christiana, feel free to help us in the chat if there was something that you in particular that wasn't answered. And I urge all of the students, come on, you have an opportunity to engage in a kind of beautiful conversation here. And there may be something that we haven't discussed this evening that's important to you. I mean, these lectures are not for the dean. I guarantee you, I assure you. I could simply contact Vivien, independent of RPI, and find out what she's doing, or kind of look her up, which I have and learned a lot. But it's really about you guys. This is, it's about strategizing and reimagining your future, and looking at different kind of roadmaps, blueprints, different strategies of engagement. Because Vivien, we have a course called Entrepreneurship in Architecture, and although it privileges business, it's intended really to highlight the fact that the students have to take ownership over their future destiny, their imagination, and the way in which their imagination engages the world at large. And
I want to be a student at your school. I mean, it's so much fun.
oh, it's great. Well, why don't you apply? I know the dean, and I'm certain you could become an architect here.
Wow, that's great. I think I have a long way before I become an architect. Thank you.
But I think I raised that because I think, and you didn't speak a lot about your trajectory as a young woman, and you're still young, from your homeland in Palestine to your studies as an anthropologist, to the moment you kind of declared yourself as a conservationist and someone who would create a seed library. And this is, I'm sure this was radical in your family. My sense is that there wasn't anyone really around you that was doing the same thing, and there was a certain amount of anxiety and maybe discomfort as to whether this was appropriate, whether you'd be respected, whether you'd have the freedom of thought and you could have an impact. And clearly you have had that, but maybe you could speak a little bit about that journey, because it certainly would resonate with the students as they decide in the coming years ahead how to design their own life, not based on what we tell them, on what the kind of how should I say it, the dominant power structure is in the architectural discipline, but based on their heart and their mind combined.
Wow, big question. And before I answer your question, I want to share a short little story that actually happened recently that has inspired me and I think many people around the world, and particularly in Palestine, which is the story of six amazing men who are political prisoners in Israeli prisons because they were very politically active. Some of them weren't even that politically active. Two of them were imprisoned for life, and they were taken when they're 20. So now they're in their 40s. I'm in my 40s. But they actually are in a high security prison, and they, with a spoon, dug a tunnel outside of this high security Israeli prison. And I'm talking about, this is in the time of great surveillance and technology where you can't be but caught. So they knew that their journey to freedom would take years of actually carving a tunnel inside the prison. But it speaks of that they knew the soil, and that's why it's important that we are people of the soil. But B, that they really, like, they are in a high security prison. There's nothing around you that could possibly give you any sign that you should even have hope. Like, hope probably would feel very dangerous in that situation. And the amount of trust that they would have had to have amongst themselves, each other, to have carved basically over the years with one spoon, their freedom. And they were free for 4 days. And one of the young men who was caught was, when they were both, the six of them were sadly arrested again and tortured, and one of them is in intensive care. But one of them wrote a letter before, and he left it for his mother before he was captured again. And in the letter, he talks about how the moment he got to taste the fruit of the tree was worth all the effort they did, and basically the torture that he knew he was gonna experience.
Right.
So I say this because I just really, it's something that I think about a lot, and I think about want to hold these amazing, inspirational men in all of our hearts today, and you know, because this is for me what real dignity is, what real like freedom is. It's not that you are given that, it's you are willing to dig with a spoon if you must, because you can't tolerate to live in any other way. And so for me, I think I had a sentiment of that I really just couldn't bear to live in any other way. And so I wanted to salvage the things I loved, and I wanted to also live as a free human and a free woman, no matter where I was. And I, you know, in my, you know, I grew up in a small town where I was, you know, my you know, what I was supposed to be was someone who, I guess, you know, turns 20 and looks for a husband or whatever and just settles down. But I couldn't, you know, I was very lucky because my mother, who was somebody, who is somebody who was, you know, had to get married very young and do this whole thing. Even though she didn't get to have the freedom that she wanted, she made sure that I had this thing installed in me literally every day, that I must make life with my own hands. And I think that really stuck with me. And I felt very repulsed by patriarchy. And I was shaved my head when I was 14 as a way to say, you know, screw everybody, I'm not gonna be this, you know, girly girl. I mean, I love my hair now and everything, but it was a way to say that I didn't want to accept what was asked of me. So this is a long way to say that, yeah, definitely when I went back and I was this woman who was perceived, you know, as, oh, I'm educated in the United States, I'm supposed to dress a certain way, I'm supposed to speak a certain way, I'm supposed to use that kind of privilege to get some high-paying, fancy job. Instead, I was found on tractors and with mules, and I think that really confused people a lot. But for me, it was a pleasure because it was a way of also asserting that that through my life without lecturing, I can show something different. Yeah. And it was a big challenge because even in some communities, the men would call me with the masculine pronoun, even though I go with feminine, like I'm her, but they would call me he, and because they were more comfortable with that. And so for me, I had to always assert, no, I am doing this, but I'm a woman, you know, like let's and it created it was hard because also, especially in the beginning, you're right, like a lot of people just didn't understand what I was doing. To be honest, I didn't fully understand what I was doing. I knew that what I was doing was insisting on doing it my way, whatever that is, at any cost. I guess I don't answer your question very well.
No. It's you know, you answered to a different drummer. You're courageous, fearless. You took risks, and it seems that it's beautiful. Your life now, from what I can tell, you're able to simultaneously acknowledge your heritage, your background, your roots, your homeland. At the same time, you operate at an international scale where you're able to see how that common language allows us to see grief and hardship and oppression and you know, environmental challenges across the world. So it's beautiful that your identity is able to kind of rescale itself, and that your empathy works on a variety of levels. And I'm sure that brings enormous satisfaction to you at this moment in your life.
It does, and it's sometimes lonely, very lonely, and really also like there are days where I spend in bed and I can't.
Yeah.
So I do struggle a lot some days. I mean, it gets better. It seems like you get older, it gets better for some
Right.
reason. But it wasn't always so easy, because the old stories that were carved in us as children take so long to reprogram yourself.
Right.
Like how can I like, for example, joy. Joy is something that's really powerful, actually. It's a really powerful creative energy. And if I were to like suggest something to anyone, and to any young person trying to do something, I would say you must be in joy. Like it has to, like, you have to fly in your heart when you actually talk about whatever you're doing. If you're not, you're just settling for mediocre. And that's where the love of magic comes in. Like, do you want to live a magical life, or do you just want to live a life? I want to live a magical life, even if it means that I sail into the ocean and I drown. Okay, I will drown and I will die having lived a magical life. I would really rather that. And I wish more people would, well, I mean, I don't wish, I mean, people can do whatever they want, but I think it would make us nicer to each other if we all followed more our joy, because then we wouldn't feel this tension, because it really, like, the more you suppress your joy, the more resentful you become. And I think the more violent, it's very easy to become more violent. I mean, I noticed it within myself. I'm not talking about like, oh, I'm so, when I suppress something in myself, it becomes easier for me to be irritated with other people. But it's never other people. It's always me. It's never other people. So I think having joy and allowing again ourselves to fall in love. One thing that happened that was challenging, for example, but also beautiful when I started the seed library, is I was basically asking farmers to take a chance, on something that was risky for them. And the reason that it was hard, and the reason that a lot of people rejected a little bit, like, or were scared of what I was doing, wasn't because I was doing anything so revolutionary in that, like, they're not gonna go to jail for it or anything, but because I was asking myself and others to fall in love with something that's dying.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of, I mean, now I'm understanding within myself that what, if we are to say I was daring, is that I was in love, and I allowed myself to be in love with something that was dying, and to say I'm still gonna invest in it, I'm still gonna love it, even if it's in hospice, and I'm still in love.
Right.
I think this is again a question for us in our lives and in the world. Like, when we're told that what we're dreaming about is nonsense, or that's a dead subject, like, can you be in love with something that's dying and allow for it to transform? Maybe and in the process I learned that there is no dying, because nothing dies, it just transforms. But then you can be creator in what.
No, it's a profoundly interesting topic. This is a segue, but it's related to everything you're talking about. Two things. I want to go back to the seed, because the seed operates on a metaphorical level. It also is literally is able to capture and suspend a kind of biological memory inside a very, very small amount of space. And then it can remain suspended indefinitely and then be unleashed. So there's something beautifully perverse about that, given that time, our relation to time is always a fleeting, and the idea of stopping time, although from an imaginary standpoint, it can be done. From in terms of one's imagination, you could stop time as a creative entity, but literally on planet Earth, it's rare that you'll see things that can freeze. And so I'm reminded of two things. One is the ice core samples, right, at the tips of the planet Earth, which they remove in order to understand the history of the world, that you can actually see time in chronological order. And there are insects and creatures and bacteria and all that stuff that is in suspended animation. And if you were to melt it, it would be released. The other thing is, I remember some years ago, we had a project where we were working with General Electric in New York State. And I had the opportunity to go to their archives. And I forget for a moment, it was a Thomas Edison device, and wasn't the phonograph. It was a cylinder that rotated and had little relief like Braille. And it made sound. And when you rotate it, you could hear Thomas Edison's voice. And there was something, incredibly uncanny, unsettling, perverse, but beautiful that his voice could permeate the room. That there was actually a machine that could stop time and hold the memory of a human being in this particular case. So it seems to me that while the seeds link you directly as an archive and library to your homeland, they also represent, as a kind of infinite alphabet, all of this knowledge around the world from all the seed libraries. And you even mentioned, and I forget the exact, you'd said something in California, they use a disproportionate amount of water to grow a certain crop, and yet some of the crops that you're familiar with don't require much water. And if only that seed could migrate to a different part of the world based on resolving an inadequacy, that shared knowledge that's specific to an indigenous location can actually be transported and do good work. It seems to me that the seed library as a global proposition is really, really interesting. And under the right circumstances, that is the curators, that there's a shared ethical mandate, that there's a lot of good and beautiful work that could be done around the world that could empower communities and revitalize landscapes and territories and so forth. So I don't know if you could speak a little bit about your particular interpretation of how seed libraries may in fact begin to speak to each other and collaborate.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty amazing because we do speak to each other already, and we collaborate a lot. And I think about it a lot these days because I have been on the road all summer in the United States. And I realized that it doesn't matter where I am, I can just find who are the seed geeks, and I have a home. I'm welcomed, and they don't even need to know. Like, we don't necessarily know each other, but we know each other.
Right.
And I know, like, it's so strange because, but it's beautiful that we feel like we can even ask each other for help, for favors.
Right.
just because, you know, we don't even know each other physically sometimes, like we've never met, but you know, oh yeah, you have the seed library in Palestine. Oh, I have the seed library in Virginia. Come to Virginia. Oh yeah, you're in Virginia. You need a car. You need a, you know, and so I feel that I'm already part of another global system. And that global system doesn't ask you for your passport or your visa. It just welcomes you because you love life.
Right.
This is just the only thing you have to have. And I think that is that must be so with other things. Like I wonder if I think with seeds it's so easy because there's so much life. You're literally like talking about life.
Right.
And who is not like and everybody relates to that. So I wonder like if more people would do that with every other, like I don't know what makes it that with seed folk it's just so easy. um and then yeah, you have like a global community that's in operation. I mean, I can fly to Thailand tomorrow, and I bet you I will be welcomed.
Right.
And I will have I've never been to Thailand even. I don't know anything, but we have this shared language, as you said, which is it's a shared language and it's a shared value that we're not interested in the dominant world, and we're going to create another world, and it's based on us being part of soil, like we're soil people, and
Yeah.
and it transcends everything.
Well, that sounds like beautiful closing comments to me. But Vivien, I want to thank you. I know, you know, we've never met before. And you actually came to my attention based on reading some reviews of what was it, the Chicago Architecture Biennale. And I was just, and I spoke to you prior to going live tonight about the fact I thought there was a lot of synergy between your life's work and the mission of our school and our community. It wasn't about architecture, it was about people, it's about community. And I thought you were beautifully poetic and articulate and actually quite inspiring tonight. So I do want to thank you for taking time out. And
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored, and I'm also so elated to know that a school like yours exists. You know, when I read about like the emails and my colleague Sharon was sharing with me, I was like, are you sure like this is like what the so I am so I hope one day I can visit in person and learn more
Oh,
about.
absolutely. And I assure you that the students that attended tonight's lecture have acquired some really kind of really important life-changing insight. And for those that will hear you online in a recorded lecture. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much
for your work, and it's really, really important. I hope we can keep in touch, and I urge any of the students who would love to participate and contribute to your project that they reach out to you privately.
Thank you. Yes, please do keep in touch. I would love to continue building.
And they have to go see your I don't know the title of your recent video, or if it's recent, on the cistern.
Oh yeah, the cistern is which we can share, I guess, in the chat, or if you want to share it with folks. Let me see. I think this is the correct YouTube link.
It's a beautiful video that she created, everyone. And
this was from last year, and it's a video. Oh, am I still online? Am I still?
Yeah, you're still here.
Yeah, I don't know where I lost. I don't see you anymore, but I'm trusting that you see me.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a video that actually I created last year with my friend Samar Hasboun, and it was actually commissioned by Storefront TV. It's a gallery in New York, and they wanted, the theme was self-care and how do you care for self. And, you know, one of the challenges we have is the fact that water is often cut off, and we don't have access to water. And so I decided to build this cistern, which is a rain harvesting cistern collecting water, which is actually now irrigating a lot of our plants and flowers. And after we built it, which was a huge task, I decided to go inside it. And the film talks about also the fact that when we were digging, we found these geodes in the soil, which tell the story of how ancient the soil is. Right. And I was thinking a lot about how, you know, we were frogs and fish before we were humans, and how limited our imagination is when we're like attached to a lot of ideologies that actually have nothing to do with our evolution. So this video is basically a commentary on that. And I just shared the link, and you know, I'm happy to play it now, or just people can watch it on their own.
That's up to you. If you play it now, we'd be happy to see it.
Well, I can play it now, and it could be our, like, after we see it, we basically say goodbye.
Thank you, Vivien.
So thank you, everybody. And I'm gonna share my screen and wait, share the video. Oh, I think, I'm sorry, I sent it to Christina. Thank you, Christina. Okay, it's here, so I'm gonna pause it, go back to Zoom, and now share my screen.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm sorry, I am a little, here we go. Is it?
We got it, yeah, great.
All right, I'm gonna mute, yeah, here.
Okay.
A few more months from now, the rain will come. This cistern will fill up. The plants will drink, we will drink, and I will baptize my skin in its very waters. And we will survive, the way we have before. Another summer, another unjust war, another cruel reality. You see, 100 million years ago, we were ocean. And 100 million years later, we are fighting not to become a desert. 100 million tries and 100 million defiant acts, 100 million seeds and 100 million plants and 100 million trees, and 100 million of us. And we will survive.
That was beautiful, Vivien. Thank you.
Thank you, and I guess I can start sharing.
Yes. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch.
And can everyone hear me all right? I'm one of a number of volunteers who runs SoA Lewis.
Is that?
It might be an idea if everybody could put themselves on mute.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Robert? Okay.
Sounds like we got it fixed.
Yeah, that was a lot of context. Vivien, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll be in touch and have a wonderful night. Appreciate it.
You
It
too.
was beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.